So thanks for coming. We're here today to talk about, the four of us are senior psychotherapists and team supervisors for Windhorses. We're Gretchen and Marta and I are with the local Boulder Windhorse, and then Lauren is with Portland. And maybe we can self-introduce ourselves more when we talk. So the way we're going to run this is we'll talk individually. We're going to speak about our personal experience of being psychotherapists. The intention really is, there's a lot of kind of theoretical and more external descriptions of psychotherapy and the kind of principles we work with, and I'm sure we'll be talking to those too. But what we really want to talk about is what it's like for each of us and how we orient within a particular Windhorse team. Because by now, probably sitting here, we represent hundreds of teams that we've together collectively sat on. So not always as a psychotherapist, but in my case, but lots of others. But anyway, that's what we want to speak to, and like what's the inner experience, and also the inner thinking and mind of a psychotherapist, of these psychotherapists, in the context of Windhorse Team. So we'll start with each of us speaking for a bit on that, and then we're going to turn to each other and have a conversation among ourselves that you're welcome to listen to, and then we'll open it up and we'll have a conversation with you all, questions, whatever, open conversation. So, and I thought I would start. And I could say I've been with Windhorse for 20 years now, and I've been a psychotherapist for 30, and of course, with that, there is a process. Just as there's a process of recovery for our clients, there's also a process of recovery for us. And after all these years of being kind of going through the ringer of the life of a psychotherapist, I've come to my own views and about how I orient myself. I should say my undergrad was in English Lit, and I really, I would say my early experience as a therapist is very shaped by that, coming not out of the sciences, not out of undergrad in psychology, which tends to be more out of the scientific ilk. And at times I'm very aware that somehow psychotherapy was captured by the sciences, and it's often practiced that way. And personally, that's not how I orient. I think it's great. It's good to validate things, but I would say I come at it through the arts more and literature. I see the kind of potency of literature. And just as a book, you read a book together, right? If we all read a book together, we could talk about character and plot and what was the author. This is my experience in undergrad and things is, okay, what was the author's time? When was it published? What were their influences? It's very parallel to what we do as psychotherapists. We try to get the context within which our clients have come into existence, and we've come to know them at this moment much further down their life. But they have many influences, and so same with like if you look at film or at visual arts, that it's similar. Like it's really good to know where this work of art came from. In the case of human beings, I'm fascinated by thinking of us as living, working art forms, that we are creative processes in motion all the time. And we're not a static book that we pull off the shelf. We are a dynamic art form. And it gets even more complicated because then when we relate to each other, our works of art are interacting and communicating with each other. And affecting each other. So it's I see humans as a very dynamic work in progress. it seems like one of the most foundational human traits is that we're right in ourselves, or maybe the three of us from Boulder have been conducting a psychotherapist training for some months now, and in that training we've been talking quite a bit about dreaming. So it's also fair to say that we're dreaming ourselves each other all the time. We're dreaming each other all the time. We're in this web of kind of interpenetrating dynamic art forms, and so I think of that. And then, of course, you could take that analogy out quite a ways, that we all have different genres we occupy, So bring that view into a Windhorse team. I think the maybe most succinct thing I could say about a Windhorse intensive psychotherapist's role on a team is to raise the lungta of the team, and ourself, and to know how to do that, and what raises lungta. And I think a lot of people are aware of this, but I'll just repeat that the word Windhorse, which we all identify, that's the thing we have in common, right? So that's as I understand, a literal translation of lungta from Tibetan, which means is that the literal translation is Windhorse, and the kind of meaning translation. One of my colleagues said that Trungpa at some point said that that lungta is unconditional confidence. So it's confidence. It's not based on outside situations. It's something you have within yourself. And this isn't especially esoteric. It's what we do when we come in and we muster ourselves up. It's what I'm doing here is I'm trying to muster my Windhorse to speak to you all under these floodlights that are a bit disorienting. But we raise our lungta, we raise our confidence, and so within a Windhorse team, the psychotherapist has often, almost always, in the case of the Boulder Windhorse, they've been often housemates, basic attenders, team leaders, and then often years into their kind of path as a clinician, they've become psychotherapists. And our job is to, this morning was a perfect beginning, because all the practices we talked about this morning are different methods. There's a very specific, concrete practicality to contemplative practice within a Windhorse team, and I think it can all come down to like raising our lungta. It's also defines like healing energy, like the ability of the team and a group of people to wake up. So that in itself is a worthy activity in a human life. But in a Windhorse team now, we're working with people who, teams are assembled for the sake of somebody who's in a very troubled place. A Windhorse team is not a small intervention in someone's life, and it's not a small expense. And so the team is brought together for someone's sake, and of course we say for everyone's sake in the team, but of course it's for the sake of one particular person generally. In the course of a team, often in just the first few months, the client's mind certainly, and the client's family system generally starts to have echoes, and I like to say it rhymes with the person's mind and family system. That the team starts to reflect that, and I've been on many teams with both Marta and Gretchen, and they're different Martas and different Gretchens, and I'm different Jacks, according to which team we find ourselves within. It's really interesting to work on teams together with the same people, because you find that you become different people, and that's because in the kind of the nuts and bolts of how a Windhorse team works is each member of the team rings with different aspects of the exchange with the client. And especially early on, that exchange is new, it's surprising. I always try to keep an eye on my own mind and my reflexes. I find it's easier for me to suddenly fall into depression or lose my temper, or like surprising flashes of emotion are much more likely to come out in the first few months. And then when the team gets stuck and we start to feel like, oh my gosh, this is kind of unworkable. You know, you hit these walls, and repeatedly it's like, oh, this is kind of impossible. Like, what was admissions thinking? You know, that's often, they said this would be really great. It's like, and then we're suddenly in this predicament together. And that's when the team, everybody's practice, but the psychotherapists in particular, since they don't have to track all of the minutia of, house activities and groceries and money and things, they're in this special place where they get to watch the team and the dynamics of the team, and you know your colleagues and how they manifest, and you can be surprised by the different ways they are manifesting. And so that's where this practice of raising Windhorse becomes essential, and because and as I think I worked into my question last night, was part of the, I would say, shamanic activity of a Windhorse team is we are doing just what I described. We are taking on the system, the family system, the client's mind, all of the predicaments of their life that brought them to us. And we are becoming, I think it's fair to say we become sick with it, and hopefully consciously. And since it's not our family, it isn't so persistent. And since we have each other, we can help each other wake up and break the spell. So if one person's falling into the spell, other members of the team can help break it. And there's quite a bit we could say about that, but maybe I'll just leave it at that, is the shamanic activity of a Windhorse team is to transmute and to take on the system of the person we're working for the benefit of in particular, and through our activity together to break up the parts that have become solid, and to help the family oftentimes reconfigure, help some voices come forward and some go back. There's quite a bit that goes on there. So but I think that's all I'll say. And we could go right down the line, or I don't know if who feels inspired to speak next.
I'd love to, actually.
Great.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jack. That's really perfect. So my name's Gretchen Kari, and I've been working at Windhorse in Boulder since I started at Friendship House, which was mentioned last night, in 1988. And then when I graduated from Naropa, the psychology master's program, it was the only one at the time, I needed a job. And I was very young, and we'd been studying with Ed Podval and studying the Windhorse project. And the entry that was available was a housemate. And so I interviewed for the job. I had two other people who were also interviewing. It was kind of a tight competition. And I still work with those people, actually, from time to time. One of them is now leading the contemplative psychotherapy program here at Naropa, and the other has been housemaid and team leader at Windhorse for almost 30 years. And so there's something, if you haven't been in Windhorse long, I have to just caution you that it sometimes doesn't let you go. So, and that may be good or bad depending on the team and the client and your own mind. But sitting here in front of the representations of the Maichi room, my experience being a psychotherapist is on a team in particular, and this happens in my private practice as well, but my training, I started at CU. I'm from Colorado, went to CU for my undergrad in psychology and women's studies, and at the time, I don't know whether CU is this way or not now, but it was very biopsychology oriented, and a lot of the professors there who were publishing had that emphasis, and I really appreciate that, actually. The science aspect was a great place for me to start, to learn about the brain and how it functions and the nervous system and all of these different conditions. Then, when it came time to graduate, I recognized that, in fact, it was said in my graduation that with that degree, those 2 degrees, women's studies and psychology, that and a quarter could get me a cup of coffee. And so I thought, well, I guess I better go to graduate school. And my professors, every single one of them that I talked to recommended Naropa, which is just down the hill. And so came here and actually interviewed with Jeff Fortuna. And one of the things that Jeff talked about in that interview was this notion of meditation practice and in the specific practice of Tonglen, which is giving and taking. We had that this morning. That practice is the foundation of what we call exchange. And it is a willingness to bring in this negativity that Jack's been talking about. It's this willingness to bring in what we typically would reject in order to kind of preserve some sense of ourselves, some comfort, and then give out what we want to keep for ourselves to someone else. That practice in the context of psychotherapy becomes very interesting. And at the time, in the mid-'80s, there was a lot of love and light going around. A lot of, and I think this is still true, this sense of bring in the light, breathe out everything that's negative and bring in what is light and, good. And when Jeff described Tonglen practice to me, it changed my life and it hasn't reverted. What occurred to me was, if I'm bringing in the light and pushing out everything that's dark, I'm no different than a car polluting, because I'm just putting out into the atmosphere something that I don't want and taking everything in that's me, which is a very selfish way of being. The other way around, flipped, is more like a purifier, an air purifier, being willing to bring in and trusting this sense of, this is where I think confidence comes in, based on a notion of things not being fixed, but being able to bring in negativity and let go of what I want in a way that's quite natural. So then part of the training at Naropa at the time, I think it still is, and also at Windhorse, is these Maichi rooms. And sometimes these rooms can be, or the qualities of the rooms, the thinking about it, it can be limited to almost like a horoscope, which is not as it's intended. Actually, my experience of going through these rooms and intensive retreats is this recognition that my mind is limitless. My mind can be completely disturbed, or it can be completely sane, because it's a mind. Like that, my clients have that same ability because they have a mind. So when I'm in relationship with my client, I'm willing to let them impact me and not be so afraid of it because of my own experience of my own mind. So in a team, we then take that out to the team, and we invite the team to affect us and infect us in a particular, openly, in the safety of the team. We as clinicians, there's a trust that's built up through this sense of kind of the grind. It's like that's what I like to think of it as, a refinement. And sometimes in Windhorse, I'm sure this is true with every center, we get to know each other very well, and sometimes we get to know each other through really hard times. Typically, it's not through the great times, it's through the really hard times. Sometimes arguing, disagreeing, sometimes a tragedy. And that grind builds up a trust where we're willing to take on the messiness of each other and the clients. And that's where the psychotherapy session, which from the outside, I brought this clock as a prop and a reminder that from the outside, our psychotherapy session looks pretty traditional. It's a 50-minute hour, oftentimes, in the same environment, in the same office, week after week after week after week. And there's a discipline, actually, that's created from that. And it's in contrast to basic attendance shifts, which may be in a coffee shop, it might be doing laundry, it might be renting an apartment. It varies tremendously. So the discipline of the therapy session in Windhorse is that the container is fixed, but what happens within the container is a sense of what Jeff talks about as this freedom, so that the relationship can happen. To me, that's one of the most interesting things. I have to recognize that I only know my mind. I know my client through what my mind is doing. I can't know my client's mind, but I only know them through how they reflect back to me, and vice versa. So this is getting a little, I don't want to get too esoteric with it, but I think it's, what I'm trying to get at is how the team and the activities of the team can help support the discipline of the therapy session, and then the therapy session and the mindset of the therapist can be reflected back into the team. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I want to definitely have everybody talk, and then there's so many things, Jack, that you said that, I could respond to. I could take any one of them and just go like, fractals. And in some ways, that's what a team does. We look for any opportunity, and there's always countless opportunities to work with something. There's not a right way to do it. It's just looking for opportunities and reflecting them back. And there's one thing that I really enjoy, that Bob Unger, who he's in Greece, or I don't know where he is these days, but he's a very close friend of Windhorse, actually, and one of the things that he says is that it's really not important what the therapist says. So if you're thinking it is, I'm sorry to break that bubble, but it's more important for the client to be able to hear what they're saying. That's the point. And it's kind of humbling after all the years of experience and all the student loans and all of the office rent and all of that, to think, I'm actually not that important. So anyway, I'll turn that over to Marta.
What? We're not that important? Oh. Wow. I'll just have to throw all this away, I was going to say. It's okay if I go next? Should we just go? Yeah. I'm Marta Arleigh. I've been with Windhorse here in Boulder for 20 years, since '99. I did work at Friendship House from, in the 90s, I guess 95 to 97, I think. I was at Friendship House. And I had just graduated from Naropa, so I was here in school from 92 to 95. I was in this room and these buildings, so it's really amazing to be back here, and it's changed so much and grown so much. My undergrad is in music, so I was a classical singer for many years, and so I really appreciate the music therapy that's happening in our German Windhorse Center, and I think I bring a creative sensibility to the work that I do just from that experience of as a singer, as a dancer, as an artist. And I started as a basic attender. I quickly became a team leader because we were very small in those days, and the team leader was going into retreat, and they needed a team leader. So I got bumped up, and then sort of in not the normal order of things, about, maybe 5 years later, I became a housemate. So I was a team leader and a housemate at the same time. And then when Mingyur, Ed Podval, came back in '02, I was part of his team for a year, and we had basically a team for him, and then eventually it was a hospice team, so that he died in the care of a Windhorse team in '03. I wrote some comments, so I think when I think about the role of the intensive psychotherapist, what comes to my mind is the unique position of attending to the subtle psyche of not only the client, but the whole team. How the members are feeling, the quality of our relationships, how each person is showing up, and the dynamics of the team. So the sort of, it feels like a privilege as the psychotherapist is to sit back from the running of the team, which is the hard work of the team leader, and we get to just tune into how is everyone doing on this team? What's the collective mind and heart and psyche here? And then we can attend to that. I'm also really interested in the unconscious level of the team and those things that we're not talking about, things that we may be avoiding. And these might be conflict, they might be our projections or different views, things that feel uncomfortable, things that come from our own family systems. So every one of us on the team brings our stuff and our family systems, and then, as you were referring to, Jack, we're also tuning into the family system of the client. So there are a lot of people in the room. There are a lot of family members and a lot of dynamics happening that all start to interact under the surface. And so as the psychotherapist especially, we're tuning into that and noticing that sort of invisible web that's underneath. So do we also, there's the aspect of the intimacy of the team. So do we share things about our lives? Do we dream about each other and about the team? What's the tone of our interactions together? Having been on, I don't know, dozens at least, maybe 100 teams by now, I don't know. Everyone feels so different. And as you were saying, I feel different on each team. I'm a different sort of version of myself, and sometimes feel like a different version of someone else. Sometimes it's this feeling of what's happening? What am I feeling? What's going on here? And where is this coming from? And asking those kinds of questions by feeling our own feelings, of course, as contemplative practitioners. Why am I feeling this way? Why are we doing what we're doing here together in our dynamic? Do we feel close? Do we feel competitive? Do we feel understood, cohesive, bored, dissociated? Teams have all of these feelings. And if we can name them and work with them, we just keep learning more about what's the mind of the client, what's the mind of the family they come from, and the context, and of course our own minds. Again, as has been referred to, the team will often start to imitate the family system of the client which helps us tune into the subtle feelings and dynamics from the different points of view of the various family members. So now we may start to suddenly understand the mother's feelings or the father's actions or why the siblings do what they do. And suddenly the whole family system starts to come alive, and we feel that. Because if we just tune into one person and not the whole family, we really don't get the whole picture. So then we have to start to parse out whose feelings, who am I sort of channeling, or as we say, exchanging with. Whose feelings am I feeling? Whose actions am I actually acting out myself? And then when we work with it consciously, that's what starts to shift it. If it's happening there in the parallel world unconsciously, and we work with it consciously, then the exchange can go both ways. Maybe the family system can start to become more conscious of these dynamics. Getting a fuller picture is sometimes uncomfortable or conflictual, but ultimately it helps us understand the complexity of the situation through the lens of exchange and how trauma and intense emotions get passed along between family members, often going back generations. So of course we are aware that all the family members that are no longer alive are also in this system. They're in this field of energy and exchange that we're tapping into. So then maybe we start to ask about grandparents or aunts or uncles or further back and what has happened generationally in this family. So as we begin to sort these out, we can understand how people have ended up in the predicaments that they have. And as a result of these unresolved or unclaimed emotions. And this can be particularly powerful, I think, because often someone comes to us feeling like they're the sick ones, they're the problem in the family, things are their fault. If only they could change, everyone else in the family is fine. And it's, as we know, that's generally not true. So it can be a great relief to know it's not just all about you. I have a particular interest in dreams, so I like to notice when a client is having dreams. I often ask what their dreams are, and then I notice when I'm having dreams about my clients. I often have dreams about my team members. I'm on a team with Jack right now where we've had this sort of ongoing project. There are 5 people on the team, and over 5 years, we've collected 30 dreams from all 5 of us. And I've woven all those dreams together along with waking life experiences that have created this collective sort of psyche or system from our dreaming life together with our waking life. So there's that whole realm that we can tap into. So dreams, of course, help to uncover all the unspoken and sometimes unfelt emotions, those that are maybe so deep in the unconscious that they are not being expressed in any other ways, any overt ways. So through looking at our dreams all together, not just the clients, all of our dreams, we can reveal much more than we're talking about and seeing on the surface. Sometimes on the surface, it seems like nothing's happening, nothing's changing, we're just stuck. And then you look at the dreams and you realize there are earthquakes, there are fights happening, there are farm animals coming out of the hidden rooms in the house. There are all kinds of things happening. But we don't see it on the surface. It looks like we're stuck, but maybe not. So some of our teams, like I said, bring dreams together quite regularly, and we may be we're doing more dream work together as staff as well, which is really rich and beautiful because we're building our relationships with each other. And just to reiterate, the stronger our relationships, the greater support system we can offer and the more resilient we are, so that when really difficult things come, we can rely on each other to hold it together. So sharing our dreams and being intimate is a really powerful way, not to mention just a wonderful way to have relationships with one another and make work more interesting and rich. Let's see. What else do I want to say? I guess I'll just say, as the psychotherapist, we're often in the position of getting closest to the client because we have this, we bring basic attendance to the psychotherapy. We're not out in the community and we're not in their home, but when we sit, there's a slogan that we use, and when we apply it to psychotherapy, we say, settle down in one place. So while we're not out and around with them, we try to settle in the office, in that regular schedule, once, maybe twice a week, and bring that basic attendance to the mind and to this more direct looking at each other for 50 minutes kind of connection. And we also have permission as the therapist to ask more questions about the family, about dreams. We're in that role that we get to ask certain questions. So we may feel the exchange in a different way than other team members of what it's like to be the client, even though everyone on the team will feel that in their own unique ways. The therapist often collaborates with the team supervisor to get a clearer understanding of what it's like to be in that particular family system as well, since the team supervisor generally is the one in direct contact with the family members if they're involved. But we tap into the family from this more through the client and their relationship with the family members. So a person's predicament often makes much more sense when we have the perspective of that whole family system and how it all fits into their entire life experience. So that's all I'll say for now.
Just do a quick time check. Okay. Hi, I'm Lauren Lose, and I'm from Portland. And I think I'm going to do a little bit of a little more of a contrast the world I came from with the Windhorse world that I've somehow landed in. I have not been at Windhorse a very long time. I've been at Windhorse for just about exactly 3 years. I think my anniversary was May 4th. And so I feel a little bit, as you all have been talking, I've been somehow picturing myself as, those Dr. Seuss characters that are kind of funny. Like I thought, well, I really don't fit. But at the same time, I actually feel like I'm home, and I really embrace it. I have degrees in a combination of engineering and psychology. I have a graduate degree in applied behavior analysis, and then I have a graduate degree in counseling as well. And so I have kind of a smattering of things, also philosophies in there somewhere too. And I am actually really a Windhorse and an IP rookie. I know the way that the being an IP is after going through a process of team leader and sometimes housemaid and certainly team counselor. I am in the position of being clinical director and IP. And that's the position I landed in to start with. So I have a really different perspective, yet what you guys all were saying, I completely relate to. And so I was feeling some comfort with that. A little bit about my background. I've worked with autism for many, many, many years, about 20 years. And then I went into more general counseling and had a private practice. But before I did that, I worked at the VA for a number of years. And it really was the belly of the beast of bureaucracy. And although we provided a lot of wonderful services there, it actually helped give me a heart for the Windhorse work because of what I saw and what I participated in. I learned lots and lots of evidence-based and manualized types of interventions, which are good. I'm not dissing that, but that was the only thing. I learned that MDs and medications ruled. I learned that evidence-based practices and haphazardly prescribed medications were not life-giving, and that impacted me profoundly. And I had an awakening of sorts while I was doing that, and also an awakening, it's kind of been a process over the years when I was at the VA and in my private practice. But my awakening actually came in the form of two people named Michael and one named Tracy, and they were at the VA. And I'll just say that Michael was non-compliant. He was a non-compliant Gulf War veteran. And he was medicated, heavily medicated, and he had a behavioral flag on his chart, as did Tracy. Michael's behavioral flag was there because he had yelled at a therapist, and Tracy's behavioral flag was there because she was so frustrated that she took a fentanyl patch and swallowed it while she was in a therapy session. And so they were, as we would talk about them at the VA, heavy hitters. But Michael decided to go off of his medication. And he told me that he was going to go off of his medication. And I was left with this choice of, do I talk to his prescriber, when there was a part of me saying, you know, you're breaking free of something that's making you miserable. So he and I came up with a deal that and I knew what he was taking. I knew it wasn't that dangerous. And he and I came up with a deal that if he had any symptoms whatsoever, he was going to go to the ER. And he wouldn't deal with his doctor at the VA. So I felt like such a subversive. But we did it. And in that time, he took on the practice of walking the beach every single day and picking up agates and collecting them. And it was the first time that he actually did mindfulness all on his own. And I watched this man blossom. So I knew there was something wrong, at least in my heart, with what I was practicing. And then there was Tracy, who came along. And Tracy desperately needed me to, now I know the terminology for it, let in. And she really needed for me to let her in. And all the things that I learned in school said, no, you don't do that with a client. You don't let in. You don't let in, and you hold these boundaries, and the most important thing is to hold the boundaries. But I let in with Tracy, and I got a lot of feedback for that. I got a lot of feedback, yet Tracy made it through. And I was forever touched by that. Fast forward to my private practice, I had some clients that also desperately needed for there to be a letting in, for me actually to experience them, and for me, more importantly, actually to be impacted by them, I think. And so I knew that I wasn't quite in the right place, but I knew nothing about Windhorse. And so fast forward a little bit, I knew that I needed to do something different, and some kind of synchronous, strange things happened, and a friend invited me to come talk to Lisa at Windhorse, and I told her I wasn't interested in the job, and 2 hours later, I felt like I was at home. And so that is really when my journey here at Windhorse started. Pretty quickly, I was in the position of IP because I had a lot of years of being a psychotherapist, but not a Windhorse psychotherapist. And it felt like it fit like a glove, and it was also very, very, very hard because all of a sudden I found myself in the land of dealing with clients who had much more severe problems than who I had been dealing with in my private practice. And I learned very quickly about the impact of exchange, and I learned very quickly about how much I could be taxed with taking in so much. It's been a very big curve for me. What I'm tempted to do right now, I'm so moved by clients and client stories. What I'm tempted to do is tell a story of a couple of things that were so different with me at Windhorse, with, of course, not naming anybody in particular, client's name, but some things that moved me so much about Windhorse psychotherapy versus psychotherapy out there where I had been before. And one of those clients came to us, was very suicidal. And she was very reluctant to say to me that she was suicidal And when she finally told me that she was suicidal, she asked me if I was going to write a safety plan for her. And she was just dreading that. And I said, why would I do that? Would that keep you safe? And she said no. And so I said, well, then we've agreed that I'm not going to write a safety plan. And she said, that sounds good. But what that led into was a conversation about her wish to be dead. And I remember in several conversations, the richness, and this is the only audience I could probably ever talk to amongst my colleagues, about the richness of talking about being dead, and the richness of wanting to be dead. The richness, that was her life, that was her identity. Her identity was actually wanting to be dead, and she had never had another opportunity to talk about that. And as I was I've been working with her for, I think, over 2 years now, I came up with what I think is a little bit of a metaphor for Windhorse IP. And again, I am a rookie, so I'm very much wanting everybody's feedback here, but has anybody seen that show Stranger Things? You know the upside down, and when you go into the upside down, you're attached to a tether. Well, and hopefully things turn out okay. Even with the tether, sometimes they don't in Stranger Things. But that was the metaphor I came up with for what I felt like I was doing at Windhorse as an IP. Is I was going into the upside down with a tether, and I was making sure that I had my tether. And I think of one of the big tethers is the team. And I'm looking at Nathan over there because he's kind of one of the rocks that I've been on, one of the tethers that I've been on teams with. Yeah. And so the tether is the team. And sometimes that tether actually, and I think you guys alluded to this, there are ups and downs with that tether. Sometimes you're in the upside down and the tether feels like it's let loose, and you try to grab it back, and it keeps on coming at you, but there's no contact at all. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes it happens that the tether actually pulls tight and pulls you out before you feel like you've completed the work. And that can be kind of disruptive too. And so I find it helpful to think in metaphors a little bit. So that's really, I think, one of my vivid experiences of doing this work is being in that. I have another, are we okay on time here? Very, very quick example. Yeah, another quick example of an IP experience I've had. The other thing outside of Windhorse is you would never necessarily treat somebody who had some, really severe, possibly personality disorders by doing interpersonal therapy and relationship work and healing through relationship work. And that has been another wonderful, eye-opening experience. Because the things that in the past I've been on the DBT teams at the VA, I've done all that work, but the things in the past where we said no and drew boundaries were where the clients most wanted us, and that was for us to enter down into that world and be in that world and be with them while they're angry and while there's distortions, and to love them through that because nobody ever did before. And it's been a bit of a harrowing experience, and it's also been a very rich experience at the same time. And I think what I can say with all of this is I can't imagine ever going back to where I was before, and also respecting all what I started out with talking about, evidence-based practices that sometimes we do. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I do, and our IPs do bring in some of the, like for instance, we do use tools. We do use some DBT tools. We do refer people out for some more pointed kinds of therapies if we feel like there needs to be some expertise. But that's all within the context of working in the upside down as well. So I think that's about what I have to say.
So I wonder at this point, because our time's been truncated, that maybe we should just move right out to talking with people. Is that good with you guys? Oh, for people to go up to talk?
If you have a question, if you would come to this mic and ask the question, and then we'll respond and you can talk. Or if you have a comment or something you want to share.
Yeah, questions, comments. conversation.
Hello. So I'm a team leader at the spot in San Luis Obispo. But something that I notice comes up, and I'm curious as IPs, how you work with it is on BAs, it sometimes can turn into a little bit of some type of a therapy, like processing at least, where somebody's going through something they want to talk to whoever they're on the BA with. So as IPs, how do you work with that information kind of going off in different directions?
Yeah. I think we're all, this is very common, this comes up quite a bit on teams. And like with most things on a Windhorse team, it depends on the team. And it depends on the particular, constellation of energies. So in some teams, you might be much more strong about, you should talk with your psychotherapist about that. Other teams, it's helpful if the person can talk with BAs. So there isn't really a one singular answer, I would say. And the psychotherapist, ultimately, I think they are the one who I prefer. We all have our different styles, so I prefer if the psychotherapist on the team is modulating that and tracking it. So if there is a lot of talking more therapeutically on shifts going on, then I want to, if I'm actually a team supervisor for both Marta and Gretchen on some teams, and on those, I'll generally defer to them. Like, what do you think about that? And have them modulate. So it still is being managed, I would say, by the psychotherapist. And if BA goes rogue and just starts doing stuff on their own and is not relating to the psychotherapist kind of balancing that, I don't like that. I tend to talk about that. So.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, that's a really great topic and question. And I think sometimes as the psychotherapist, I hear themes, and we communicate with each other a lot about each shift, but not necessarily each session. And so sometimes in a team meeting, I might hear themes that come up also in therapy. And when I really kind of look at that, well, that's pretty natural because that's what that person is chewing on. So, why wouldn't it be coming up, But I think how the basic attender works with that is where I think the skills of basic attendance really do come in. And it really does take a good supervisor to work with that and a whole team to notice, is this the skill level of the basic attender? Is this a powerful client who's inducing, if you will, or is there some sort of exchange happening where someone feels impelled to fix it? That can be really great information. So in some ways, as the psychotherapist, I try to watch my own tendency to get too rigid about it, but really try to take everything as more information for how the team is doing, how the team's functioning. So, Marta, I'm curious about, your experience of it.
Yeah. I'll add a little bit, which is that the beauty of the design of these teams is that each of the roles serves a really particular function, and then all of those functions fit together. So we could also look at it with body, speech, and mind. So as basic attenders, that role is more attending to body, physical health, eating good food, being outdoors, cleaning the house, buying groceries, and really being kind of more active. So we want to honor the quality of the relationships in each of these roles. then the team leader role is more to help with organizing and kind of prioritizing and making schedules, and that's a really important aspect of the client and of the relationship. And then if there's too much psychotherapy kind of stuff coming up there, it might dilute the actual psychotherapy sessions. And I've had the experience where the client might say, oh, I'm good. I'm not going to come to therapy this week, because they've talked 5 times that week already to their basic attenders and their team leaders, and then they don't want to come to therapy. So that disrupts the balance of the team and sort of the proper, I don't mean that's for lack of a better word, sort of the balanced relationships and how they all fit together. So again, without disrespecting, that for the basic attender to say, oh, nope, we can't talk about that. We don't want to censor people, but to say, like you said, oh, that would be great to bring to therapy. Why don't you talk to the therapist about that tomorrow? It also helps with just learning to contain a feeling for a little bit, knowing that you have a therapy session later that day or later that week, and not sharing really personal things all the time. So it can also just help bring about that kind of more inner balance. And then each relationship can really serve in the way that it's best to serve for the whole team.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I was really relating to what you were saying, Gretchen, about using that within team dynamics when it happens. So when I can think of the occasions where we've had that happen, and I think it's happened on several occasions. I can think right now one client we have where there's some splitting that's going on, and so I happen to be the IP, and so it's often let's talk to the team counselors about the IP session and try to swear the team counselors to secrecy, which they don't do. And so it's actually kind of helpful when it's introduced from that end, because then it blows open a whole dynamic that needs to be blown open. But we've had also some occasions where some, as Jack said, some team counselors go rogue. And we've been able to use that on the teams really well, where that comes out, and it's not like it's a fun discussion to have, but it comes out that, well, I don't trust the team leader and I don't trust the IP that they're doing the right work, because this is what the client's telling me. And so then we just have just unimaginable riches to work with in the team meetings. And so, yeah. And so, so it's really, when it comes up, I don't actually worry about it. I just think, ooh, there's more grist for the mill coming, unless it becomes a chronic issue. And then sometimes they have to go into my office and we have to talk.
Any other questions?
Shout-out questions, unless you know the mic, we can always repeat it.
So I would like to hear from you in one sentence or less or whatever. What is the most shocking thing you've learned about yourself?
Salacious, is that what you want?
Salacious, shocking, disturbing, fabulous about yourself.
The most? I've learned all kinds of things. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I have to think about that for a minute, Eugenie. I'm not surprised by my mind too much, honestly.
Or themes, like a theme.
Like I said, I'm not that surprised by what comes up. I know that I've got it all, and it can all come up. And I think that's part of I think it's a really important, and what Ed in his book calls, I guess, perverse impulse, is, by which I believe what he means by it is like letting the therapist, if you know you're not going to act on things, and this is also a lesson that we all need to learn and our clients need to learn, but the more you trust yourself to not take action, the more you can let yourself think and feel. If you don't trust yourself to not act, then you probably shouldn't think and feel too much. But I think I trust myself to not take action, so I'm capable of all kinds of things. And it's fun in a team. I'm kind of hijacking your question. It's fun on a team to, when I trust my colleagues, and the more I trust them, then we can do that too. I remember like a year ago on a team with you, Marta, where I knew, there was like our client's this young woman who's got a lot of borderline features, and then Kelly's our team leader for that team, and Marta, and I knew that you guys could stand up against any kind of outrageous male chauvinist comments, and and this is a dynamic in the family system. So I remember saying, I can't remember exactly what it was, and maybe you do, something kind of egregious and outrageous, and all three of you looked at me with just this scathing look. It was kind of wonderful, and it allowed the client to I think everybody understood the humor, but I was also kind of poking at this sore spot, and it was really good because then the client could defy me, and knowing that she had these other two strong women that were going to support her. So.
It's a tricky question, Eugenie, but yeah, and filmed. I think shocking. So really, what came to my mind, I was working with someone who had a very intense body dysmorphic disorder, and it was a very challenging team for me, challenging client. And one of the things that I noticed was that after a number of months sitting in session, and this person never missed. So I definitely noticed myself a little disappointed when, right there in the waiting room, and then the whole session just letting me have it. And there was a point in time where he would describe how his sense of his own disfigurement, and I started to notice in session that that's how I was perceiving him, that my own perception, my own visual perception was changing, and his face would morph, and he would sometimes be a beautiful boy, and sometimes he would look hideously disfigured. And it really showed me, it was pretty creepy, actually, at first. And then I kind of went with it, relaxed with it, and I really got this understanding of, like, wow, that's exchange right there. I hadn't really experienced it with my sense organs that strongly, and I had a kind of a deeper understanding of his predicament, in that way. It was pretty interesting. I think one of the things that fostered that was the discipline of being in the same, place every time, in my office, and with these constants around. So that's campfire story.
I think along similar lines, I think when this first started happening, I was shocked by it, and now it's no longer shocking. It's actually now my practice. But when I first started to allow myself to have feelings about my clients, like to really let in disliking someone or dreading seeing someone, or as they talk, just thinking, this is terrible, or I really don't like this person. And then, at first just thinking, oh, that's terrible. I can't feel that way. This is bad that I feel this, and I shouldn't. And then, continuing to just be with that and realize, oh, wait. It's okay. This is an important feeling. And I'm remembering one young man in particular who I saw twice a week, and then he started to want to come 3 times a week. And he had such an intense personality and physical presence. He was really big, and he was loud, and he would just be so intense in my office, and my feelings were huge, and I really disliked him. And when I could stay with that, and then I suddenly, it broke, and I realized this must be how his mother feels about him. that he was not loved. And it was this profound sadness that I suddenly felt, and almost saw him differently physically. Like he suddenly looked like this vulnerable, hurt little boy who was just fighting to make somebody like him or want to be with him or want to play with him. And at that point, I related to him differently, and I'd see him, and I was happy to see him, and he was like this little child who had a sort of innocence to him, even though it was still hard to be around him. But I felt this love and compassion for him, and his struggle to be liked and to be loved.
When I first heard your question, I immediately thought, okay, what's the worst thing I've discovered about myself? And then I sat with it, and I go, oh, she said shocking, not the worst. But the first thing I did come up with when I was thinking the worst is how bossy I hear myself being sometimes. I'm not going to look at those people over there. Oh my gosh, I didn't know I had that in me. But really the most, I think, shocking kind of in an exciting way for me was once really, I've felt, I'm hesitant to use the word immersed since I've only been doing this 3 years, so just don't laugh at me. But when I felt immersed in my IP work and doing all of this, I discovered daydreams. And I discovered daydreams in psychotherapy. And I discovered this interesting interplay between me and the client, and I would have these, I call them intrusions with a particular client. I go, I had an intrusion, do you want to hear it? And I have these intrusions come in, and they almost, a huge percentage of the time have some meaning for this relationship that's happening. And I think the shock was the actual intrusions themselves and how they actually had meaning. And now it's just kind of exciting and everyday, and it adds to some of the spice and wonder of the work. And it feels actually kind of not ordinary, but that I can count on it now.
Do you want to come over here to ask the question? Thanks.
Hi. First, thank you. This is really helpful.
I think it just pops back in. Yeah.
Thanks. In listening to you all, I was really resonating with this sense of like being the air filter, and letting in certain kinds of energy and transmuting that. And I was kind of hearing it on a couple of levels. One is just like energetically that we could let that in and notice we're having certain experiences that might be harder to be with, and finding a way to be with that more, and making space for that. And then somehow just in our presence, there's a kind of transmutation that happens implicitly, but then also a kind of explicit in terms of looking at the dynamics with the person or on the team and how that relates to the family, which sounds more like in terms of story or narrative or having a new dream together. I don't know. There's probably lots of ways to talk about that. But I guess I was curious to hear more if you have any thoughts or want to say more about those different levels that we kind of transmute within, if that makes any sense.
I may commandeer your question. I don't know if I'm going the right direction that you want, but I guess I think about, we're talking sometimes among us about what it's like to sit individually with people, which is in a lot of ways is what it's like to sit with a kind of private practice client who you don't have a team with. So I guess I want to talk more about the team experience and how you use a team as a psychotherapist in a Windhorse team, or how I see it happening. let's see, there's a really important kind of supervision tool that we use and there's two parts. One is the body, speech, mind supervision model, and that initially they really focus on the body, speech, mind, and then I don't know if you're the one, Jeff, who brought, but I know that in the early 2000s you added the bringing in a narrative or a kind of process note. So the way we do these supervisions now is we'll do a more kind of classic body, speech, mind presentation, and then we will, to orient the people in the supervision group to this, and then we will go into talking about a particular actual narrative, which is kind of like telling a dream. And we use the same rules as like, okay, in the first person. So I walked out in the waiting room and, I saw them, I felt this, they said this, I felt this. This kind of note is really fascinating to use. I think that can be used every day in a team meeting, and particular when the client is not present. So in the Boulder, there's different ways this gets used in different Windhorses, I know. But in Boulder, what we'll do is we'll often have a team meeting where the client's present, but we'll have a team meeting often alternate weeks where it's without the client. And in those, I try to, my preference is that the team leaders like to busy things up. Hi, Richard John. They get their schedules, and there's a lot of things that team leader has to accomplish. And I like to, if possible, contain that, and then go around for each team member who's present, and really especially and I prefer to start with the basic attenders, and really help them talk about their exchange. And we're pretty good about this, but you have to watch if people try to correct somebody else's exchange. It's like, no, that we have different feelings, just like in a family. Different kids have different parents, I like to think. Even though they're the same two parents, the two kids in the same family can have completely different experiences of their parents. Same thing in a team. It's really important that you let each person have their separate experience of their relationship with the client. Just as in the body-mind speech, you want to have each person who witnesses the presentation of the speaker to have their separate exchange with the presentation. And when you separate them out, so I don't know if I'm getting to your question, but this is though the thing of this is it helps a person, it helps a team metabolize and kind of transmute what they're going through, their particular personal exchange. If it's not muddied up with your exchange and your exchange and your exchange, I can really drop into mine, and it can be radically different from how each of you are experiencing this person, and that's good. And when we help each other do that to keep clarity and separation, so I can really go into my experience of that, and that is a really remarkable and in a way in our work life, it's an everyday thing that's going on in every team, is dropping into my personal exchange and helping to digest it, and helping us, I'm just thinking of us as a team, that we help each other digest it. So.
Yeah.
Did I even go where he was?
I think it. Yeah, I appreciate what you were saying, and realize we have only about 5 minutes, right? Yeah. But I wanted to just say something. I hesitate to say it because it came up last night, and then if I'm hesitating to say it, then I could get really curious about it. But in my sense, as far as this role of IP in the context of a team, there's a responsibility of the IP to take care of the team's mind. And I think sometimes we forget that the team is made up of people who are having their own experiences, and it's not always just related to one client. It's a field of experience that the client is a member. Last night someone mentioned, and I was touched by it very much, that the clients are the most important thing. And I don't agree with that completely. I think that, for example, this happened just yesterday in a team meeting. There was what I noticed in the seat of the IP was that 3 people, and then myself as well, so 4 people were talking about something that was very triggering. And I noticed, oh, wow, we're all quite triggered. And it's not necessarily, the client is just one of the members who maybe is triggered. And so the client being able to be part of a team as opposed to always the center, it protects them. And it also protects the team, you know. So they become part of this, protects the whole, protects the system. Otherwise, if the client is always the most important, then it's too much pressure on the client. It's a narcissistic setup, and that can be really dangerous, especially for the client. So anyway, I wanted to just put that in, and we just have 3 minutes.
I might add, I want to just add a little something to that I do think that the team and also our body, speech, mind presentation groups, which we have at various intervals for our various groups, so we can have generally 2 a month in sort of the configuration we have now. And I'll just say a little story of a client I was working with who I had a dream about the team tending this little tiny garden space where a tree grew, and it was called the grieving tree. And the garden, the team was tending to it. It had a little stream running through it. And I was doing a body, speech, mind presentation of this client, and I shared that dream, and I was sharing other things, and I started to cry. And I really cried. And the whole group, there were 6 of us in this group, they were so wonderful, and they held this emotion with me, and it was a surprise to me. I didn't know, it just suddenly welled up. And it was such a good feeling to just be able to have that. It was partly my grief connected with the client's grief, and who knows, other collective grief that was in there. And then we could talk about it, and I could just cry, and it helped me to just feel that, you know, in my body, that there's this grief and this trauma underneath things, and I can come back to that in my mind. I can come back to that when I'm sitting with her or sitting with the team and say, right, and there's this grief. And so that was one of those experiences, I think, where that feeling, I could feel that, you know, painful feeling and bring some kind of insight and clarity and calm back out from it with the help of the group.